Go ahead.
So I don't know how long we were off air. Back on air now. So all you mafia muttheads, watch out. And yeah, sometimes I use random stuff. So we were looking at, I don't know how many of these I got in, looking at mafia contacts with Jack Ruby, okay? And this is before JFK's assassination. So I think this is alphabetical. I actually missed the first one, so it goes. Close associate of Jimmy Hoffa, Barney Baker, worked as a Teamster organizer. You heard of the Teamsters. I don't have to tell you that. That's mafia dirty, okay? Or at least it was back then. Under Hoffa's direct orders until jailed on a federal racketeering conviction in 1961. So this is before the assassination. Baker started out in the late 1930s and early 1940s, a long time, as a strong-arm man for a racketeering outfit in the New York City waterfront. Fun times. During this period, he was wounded in one gangland-style execution and was questioned about another, and at one point was on the lam himself for a dock murder. So he was a murder suspect. Huh? Yeah. How many murder suspects have you hung with? Right? Did a stint with Bugsy Siegel in Las Vegas. Bugsy Siegel ended up with a bullet right through his eye. It's done by a probe, just right through the eye. Didn't cause much more damage to poor old Bugsy. There's a picture out there somewhere. You'll probably be able to pick it up on the internet if you're so interested. It's not that gruesome. In 1952, he was elected, that'd be selected, really, president of Teamsters Local 730, and soon became organizer for the Central States Conference. Fun times. Baker functioned in the Teamsters as a versatile labor goon. So, goon is an understatement, okay? So, as Robert Kennedy phrased it, one of Hoffa's, that's Jimmy Hoffa's, roving emissaries of violence. So, the FBI identified him as a reported, not Robert Kennedy, identified him as a reported muscle and bag man for Teamster President James Riddle Hoffman. Yeah, Jimmy Hoffa, his real name was James, and he had a middle name, Riddle. Okay. Contacts with Ruby on November the 7th. Holy smokes, that's just a little over 2 weeks before the assassination. Baker called Ruby from Chicago, where Ruby hailed from originally. Ruby called Baker the next day. Wow, how many phone calls have you had from high up mafia officials, and then you'd phone them up the next day? How many times has that happened to you? The name Barney with 3 of Baker's phone numbers, so that's obviously Barney Baker. 3 of his phone numbers is found in one of Ruby's notebooks. Huh? So I talked about Joseph Campisi, high up in the Dallas Mafia. I just mentioned it in case the camera cut out before I got around to his name. Frank Caracci, mentioned before, maybe the camera cut out. Involved with Carlos Marcello. It should probably be Marcello, the head of the mafia back then in Louisiana. Some people claim, and it probably isn't that far off, seeing how corrupt politics was in Louisiana back then, and probably still is, he was the most powerful guy in Louisiana. Carlos Marcello or Marcello. Okay, so let's just see. Joseph Campisi. Okay, we'll just go back to him. Contacts with Ruby, and this is a lot. Joseph Campisi was described by Ruby's sister, that's Jack Ruby's sister, Eva Grant, as a close friend of Ruby. Huh? Close friend. A mafia thug. How many close friends have you got in the mafia that you know about? Ruby's roommate, George Senator, named Mr. Campisi, who operates the Egyptian Lounge, so that would probably be a strip club of some description, as one of Ruby's 3 closest friends. Now, George Senator was just not nobody. He was Ruby's roommate. Campisi also gave conflicting accounts concerning a large sum of cash found on Ruby when Ruby shot Oswald. So we don't know what these reports were, but he knew about this money, it looks like. Yeah? Was he the source? Maybe not the source, but maybe the conduit. A lot of money. Yeah? In December 1963, Campisi told the FBI that he'd visited Ruby on November the 30th. So it's not as though his memory would be bad. This is next month. 1963 in the Dallas County Jail, as confirmed by police records. So they'd actually ask for ID. During the same FBI interview, Campisi reported that his last contact with Ruby prior to then occurred on the night before the assassination when Ruby came to the Egyptian restaurant for a steak. In 1978, however, Campisi once again reversed himself and denied this assassination eve contact. Why? He valued his life. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you were mafia. If you started talking about involvement in mafia involvement in the assassination of Kennedy, you're dead meat, as dead as JFK. Frank Carracci. So a strip joint operator. Let me see. Contacts with Ruby. So Carracci's documented mafia member, not just someone who hung around. Carracci was one of those mob figures whose contacts with Ruby were apparently confined to the pre-assassination period. Between June and October of '63, as detailed later, Ruby visited one of Carracci's New Orleans nightclubs, telephoned another several times, and met with Carracci at least one occasion. So didn't really know Carracci. He got to know him pretty well in the less than half a year before the assassination. He probably didn't want to know Carracci or anyone in the mob afterwards. Frank Chavez. So he was involved with Teamsters in Puerto Rico, and it looks as though he had an unhealthy interest in Molotov cocktails and other firebombs. Okay. So in '64 and again in '67, Chavez set out from Puerto Rico with a reported intention of killing Robert Kennedy. But Chavez's designs were squelched a year after the latter trip when he was killed by one of his own bodyguards. So we don't know if that was, let's say, FBI undercover guy taking the guy out. Probably more likely he was taken out by on a mafia contract, one of his fellow mafia. You know, there's no honor amongst thieves. Still less amongst murderers, okay? Yeah, and you can quote me on that. That's an original. Contacts with, it's not that good, but what the heck. It's true. Contacts with Ruby. Between '60 and '62, Leopoldo Ramos Ducos was Chavez's organizer for Teamster Locals 901. So that's in Puerto Rico. Ramos Ducos told the FBI on November the 27th, 1963. What was the FBI doing investigating this guy 5 days after the assassination? They heard Chavez mention the name of one Jack Ruby as someone connected with the Teamsters Union. Ramos Ducos also stated in the fall of '61, Chavez had told him he had an appointment to meet Richard Kavner, International Vice President of the Teamsters Union, and Jack Ruby, as well as a third Teamster official. Yeah. A link between Ruby and Chavez was further documented by a Justice Department memorandum of November. I wonder if that actually made it into the report, the Warren Commission report. November 26, '63. This is 4 days after the assassination, indicating a connection between Rubenstein. Guess what Jack Ruby's real last name was? Rubenstein. It probably was originally with his ancestors Reuben. Rubenstein is actually German. It means Reuben's stone. It's German for ruby. And Frank Chavez and Tony Provenzano. Tony Provenzano is a bad guy, okay? The third man, Provenzano, was a Teamster International Vice President, and a captain in the Genovese Mafia family from New York. Okay? They probably say Genovese, but I don't care. He was convicted of extortion in '63 and a murder in 1978. The connections are credible in view of Ruby's one-time involvement with Paul Dorfman. I was mentioning Dorfman before, right? Paul Dorfman in a Chicago Teamster local, and other Teamster links of Ruby to be discussed. Okay, Joseph Francis Civello, or they probably say Civello, was a mafia boss of Dallas during the 50s and 60s, and one of the 59 delegates apprehended at the 1957 Mafia Convention, Appalachian, New York. So back then, 57, he was top 60 in the Mafia, it looks like, in all of the United States. You apprehending that? How many top 100 Mafia officials in North America have you been involved with in your whole life? So I guess he was arrested at that Appalachian shindig. Civello's criminal record dates back to 1928, includes arrest for murder and a conviction for federal narcotics violation. My suspicion is he wasn't convicted for murder. Why? Potential witnesses would have been scared off or actually bumped off. Yeah. Born in Louisiana, Civello was friendly with Carlos Marcello, to whom he is connected by toll call records, plural, okay? Phoning back and forth. Contacts with Ruby. Well, this is way too long. I mean, it's more than a page. Contacts with Ruby. This is the head of Dallas Mafia. He was an underling of Marcello working out of New Orleans. Different state, same idea. Okay. Moore told the FBI, he said this is someone who's being interviewed by the FBI, told the FBI of deals involving Ruby, 2 Dallas policemen, and local underworld figures. Several of his allegations were verified years later by arrests for the activities he described. Most interesting was Moore's report about an Italian importing company. Guess what they would have been importing? Could be almost anything, but yeah. At 3400 Ross Avenue in Dallas, where Moore was employed, kind of in a position to know, during the early 50s. Moore was characteristically accurate. You got that? Accurate. When he told the FBI, he suspected that his employers, Joseph Civello, but it's misprinted, mistyped in the, they've got it in the back here. It's really Civello, okay? And Frank Lamonte might have been importing, guess what? Narcotics, yeah. For the Dallas directory, listed the store at 3400 Ross Avenue to a brother of Mafia boss Joseph Civello. So it's not Cirello, it's Civello. The Joseph Cirello, transcribed by the FBI, was thus Joseph Civello, whose business fronts included import, export, olive oil, and cheese, and Mediterranean products, right? And whose criminal activities did, in fact, include narcotics dealings. Okay, Moore told the FBI in his November 63, see, like the FBI knew what was happening. They covered this up for LBJ. But they knew, they were following these leads up. Moore told the FBI in his November 63 interview that Ruby was a frequent visitor and associate of it's not Cirello, it's Civello and Lamonte, or Lamont. Interview 64 by the FBI, again, at one interview, it wasn't Lamonte, so this is Lamonte, admitted having known Ruby since the early 1950s. It's a long time, it's over 10 years, or roughly 10 years, further corroborating Moore's assertions. So Civello once told a author, Ovid Damaris, yeah, I knew Jack, presumably Jack Ruby. We were friends, and I used to go to his club. That would be a strip club. Okay, so Bobby Jean Moore's FBI interview, spanning 2 pages in National Archives files, was published by the Warren Commission as Exhibit 1536. Both are reproduced in the photo section, and it's in the back. I've seen it. But the Commission's published version gave no inkling of Ruby's frequent visits with Dallas Mafia boss Joseph Civello. Also excluded was Moore's expressed belief that Ruby was connected with the underworld in Dallas. Why? Because the Warren Commission says there were no connections, Ruby, with the underworld, anywhere, Dallas or anywhere else. In fact, the entire second page of the original National Archives report was omitted in Commission Exhibit 1536. And 3 paragraphs of the original's first page, mentioning Joseph Civello, that would be Civello, were blanked out from an otherwise perfect photocopy of that page. In this fashion, with 7 of the original 9 paragraphs omitted or excised, understand folks, that's 3/4 or more of the report, Moore's account became almost compatible with the Warren Commission's denial of a significant, well, they said significant link between Ruby and organized crime. Well, that's pretty appalling, isn't it? So, yeah, it's roughly, well, maybe not quite 3/4, 2/3. So a whole page was left out. And then from the first page, this much was left out. This much was left in. So 3 paragraphs. There's shorter paragraphs than these here. I don't know. It's about 3/4 of the thing was left out. Joseph Glazer, Ruby's sister, Eva Grant, Jack Ruby's sister, testified that Joseph Glazer was one of New York City's wealthiest booking agents, probably would have been in rackets. Well, that's mafia, the mob. So, contacts with Ruby. On August 5th, 1963, Jack Ruby visited Joseph Glazer in New York City. Ruby placed 2 calls to Glazer 10 days later. So that's that probably had something to do with booking a stripper or something like that. But he might have been doing some other stuff. Ruby's close connections were more with Los Angeles. Well, actually with Los Angeles, but specifically, really, even more specifically with New Orleans, Tampa, and Chicago. Anyway, Alexander Gruber. Two-page, so let me see, the Warren Commission published a 4-page FBI interview with Gruber containing this self-appraisal. He said he was a member of no organization, Gruber did, other than the Democratic Party or the Boy Scouts of America. But they withheld information from the National Archives files until 1970. This, 7 years after the assassination, approximately, this FBI report summarizes Gruber's police record of 6 arrests under 2 aliases. How many people do you know have an alias? Yeah. Especially now that Prince is dead, you know, the artist formerly known as Prince. In Illinois, Indiana, and California, guy got around. He's like the Beach Boys in 1964, or was that late 63, with a conviction for grand larceny. Yum, 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 yum. Yeah, Gruber also maintained known connections with hoodlums who worked with racketeer, that's the mafia guy, Mickey Cohen. Contacts with Ruby. Al Gruber was a friend of Ruby from Chicago, way back when. Yeah, I told you Ruby came from Chicago, where he was called Jack Rubenstein. Maybe it was Jake, or Jacob Rubenstein originally. And then in November 1963, after 10-year separation, this is about a week before the assassination, Gruber paid an extended visit to Ruby in Dallas. Ruby then called Gruber in Los Angeles 3 hours after President Kennedy was shot. The two described these contacts in grossly conflicting accounts. Why would they be conflicting if they were telling the truth? One or the other was lying. Paul Roland Jones, best known for leading the Chicago mob delegation in the Dallas bribe attempt, but his criminal record is quite well-rounded. His first major infraction was the murder of a state witness in Kansas, for which he was sentenced to life in prison for 30 months. So he's actually convicted. He actually did it, okay? Murder. How many murderers have you had contacts with, folks? Especially mafia. So in 1940, with typical mob political aplomb, Jones secured a pardon from Governor Hussman, whatever. So while appealing his 47 conviction in an affair in an abortive bribe attempt, Jones was convicted of flying 60 pounds of opium, that's fairly substantial, over the Mexican border. In '60, Jones was indicted for perjury in connection with the Texas Adams Oil Company swindle. Contacts with Ruby. Jones told the FBI that he got to know Ruby quite well in the late 40s in Dallas and visited him occasionally thereafter. Jones claimed the relationship was just a friendly one. Yeah. But Ruby's interrogation by the FBI Federal Bureau of Narcotics in connection with Jones' opium smuggling arrest. So when was that? 1960. No. 46. Yeah, so maybe 47. Ruby knew him well, and the FBI knew there might have been some sort of connection. They indicated otherwise. Jones dropped in from out of state to see Ruby at the Carousel Club a week before the assassination of President Kennedy. I wonder what they talked about. Yeah. How they were big fans of Jack Kennedy, and Jackie really, they really got off on her. Yeah. Okay, Russell D. Matthews. It was described in one FBI report as a burglar, armed robber, narcotics pusher, and murder. Okay. Yeah, here's another murderer that looks as though he had connections with Jack Ruby. What's the difference between just common everyday murder and taking out the president? It's just a matter of greater ambition. He worked for mob-controlled Cuban casinos in the late 50s, and there's a Cuban connection. Then turned to Dallas underworld pursuits in the 60s. So the Dallas Morning News reported that Matthews was arrested more than 50 times by Dallas area law authorities, but served time in prison only once. Talk about catch and release. I mean, the Mafia's got it down pat, right? 2 years on a federal narcotics violation, so he's convicted on that, right? In January '74, so this is 11 years after Kennedy was assassinated, Matthews was subpoenaed by a federal grand jury in Houston, still in Texas, concerning a reported contract to kill informants of corruption in the Houston Police Narcotics Division. He is now employed at the Horseshoe Club in Las Vegas, and this was in the 80s, 88 maybe? 88. Long career there. Matthews is an associate of Mafia figures Santos Trafficante and Joseph Campisi. Campisi out of Dallas, Santos Trafficante, one of the two top Mafia engineers of Kennedy's assassination, along with Carlos Marcello. Contacts with Ruby. So this is Russell D. Matthews. 4 witnesses describe Matthews as an associate or friend of Ruby. On October the 3rd, 1963, a little more than a month before Kennedy's assassination, a call was placed from the Carousel Club, that's Jack Ruby's club, one of them, to a number in Shreveport, Louisiana, listed to Elizabeth Matthews, Russell's former wife. Louis J. McWillie, what a name, eh? McWillie. Okay, described by Dallas police as a gambler and murderer. Here's another murderer who this guy claims hung with Jack Ruby. Yeah. After moving to Dallas as a young man, he became a prominent figure in illegal gambling in the 40s, according to an FBI report. So, Social Security records established McWillie's employment in 42 and 43 by local racketeers bosses Lester Benny Binion and Benny Bickers, talk about alliteration, at the Southland Hotel in Dallas. So this is 20 years or so before Kennedy was whacked. Throughout the 40s and 50s, McWillie was involved in the operations of several gambling spots in the Dallas area, including the Top of the Hill Club, Chipangos, and is that Japan? Anyway, Chipango, and a gambling house at wherever in Fort Worth. From September 58 till May 60, McWillie was manager of the mob-owned Tropicana Hotel in Havana. There's another Cuban connection there. Yeah. The other hotel's other top men include mobsters Giuseppe Cotrini, John Guglielmo, Norman Rothman, oh that's a big name, Willie Bischoff, that's German for bishop, and Meyer and Jake Lansky. Those are big names, those last two, Meyer Lansky in particular. Ah. After being expelled from the Tropicana by the Castro regime, McWillie managed to stay on as the pit boss of the Capri Hotel Casino. So actually, Castro let the casino stay open in Havana for a while, and the guy who managed them was a guy later involved in the Watergate affair. And what was the name he was going by? I'll remember it shortly. But quite a character. He's one of the, I think he's one of the guys involved with the break-in, or at least involved with the guys who did the breaking. But, he changed his name. I think he changed it to something Irish. Just glitching on the name. Anyway, McWillie, while in Havana, McWillie associated with Meyer and Jake Lansky, Santos Traficante. I mean, Florida's right next door to Cuba, and Santos Traficante out of Tampa. Willie Bischoff, Dino Cellini, and other top mobsters. He was finally forced out of Cuba in January '61, along with the rest of the mob. Well, it's just Castro was operating another kind of mob, with most of his assets confiscated. Then, after departure from Cuba, he worked on the Caribbean islands of Aruba and Curacao. Then became pit boss of the Cal Neva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, the same hotel in which Frank Sinatra was forced to relinquish his 50% ownership because of contacts with Sam Giancana, then a Chicago mafia boss. So this is it's like a square of the people that were most involved, or the places: Chicago, Nevada, California, New Orleans, and Tampa. So he worked at the Riverside Hotel in Reno, which was owned by mobsters from Detroit at that point in time. And later on, when that declared bankruptcy, he moved down to Las Vegas, worked at the Thunderbird Hotel. Hotel, not motel. So he's overseeing the gambling, according to his own testimony. So he was still at the Thunderbird, in which Meyer and Jake Lansky held interests at the time of the assassination. Later on, when he was interviewed by the Hotel Assassinations Committee in '78, he was employed at the Hotel Holiday Inn Casino in Las Vegas. There you go. Guy got around.
You have 52 seconds.
Oh, that's good. So we'll leave off with this guy. We'll just finish connections with Ruby. Ruby, McWillie, and others reported that the two were close friends. So they both described themselves as close friends. Ruby reported he'd once 4 guns shipped to McWillie in Cuba. Ruby was a gun runner to Cuba, according to his own account.
All right, well, for the last few seconds, I'm going to show you some flowers in the garden, because it's nice. Nice to see flowers, isn't it? So those are cosmos, and there's some calendula here. Quite a bit of calendula now. And I have little cobs on my corn right there.